week. We've had some kind of off and on issues with the projector. So maybe just if you could have a little bit of grace with us and the Open Signal team and tech team who are working on resolving that. We'll go ahead and get started nonetheless. I just want to take a moment to thank PCC for hosting us today and for Open Signal's help and support. If folks don't know, bathrooms are down the hallway and to the right, and help yourself to food and beverages throughout the meeting. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do a check-in today before we go ahead and get started. For the check-in, I'm just going to invite everyone to go around and share their names, their pronouns, and what practice or value they want to bring to the conversation today. We'll do this with all staff, council members, and one of the allocation committee members who is joining us today as well. Would someone mind getting us started? Let's see.
Hi, my name is Jamie LeBaron, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am bringing open-mindedness today to the conversation.
Hi there, my name is Stephen Pham, pronouns are he, him. I will practice listening today.
Hi, I'm Brian Schmettinghoff, he, him. I'm going to bring comfort in a state of overwhelmedness with information. That's comfort and patience.
Hi, I'm Lisa Pellegrino. I use she, her pronouns. And Jamie, you and I must have had the same telepathic, because I literally read that question and thought open-mindedness, and then you said it. So.
My name is Katrina Peterson. I use she, her pronouns. And I really want to bring listening today.
Good morning. My name is Meg McElroy. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm going to bring the value love today because I think it's in short supply and it's what makes us human.
Hi, I'm Erica Bridgman, she, her pronouns, and I'm going to bring focus and calmness today.
Hi, I'm Kamala, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm thinking about curiosity.
Hi, I'm Karina. I'm she, her pronouns, and I will be bringing empathy.
Favela. Oh, thank you, Jacob. Good morning. Let me start over. Buenos días. Alejandra Favela, she, ella pronouns, and I'm bringing understanding this morning, or trying to understand.
Jacobson Valentine, he, him pronouns, and I will bring joy and happiness to this meeting.
Lolita and Lene, would you like to check in? Lolita is sharing that she doesn't have any sound. Joel or Yuxing, would you mind working with Lolita on her sound? Charity, would you be open to joining us and just checking in? You can go ahead and come over here and grab a mic.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Charity.
Bring the mic towards your face, Charity, yeah.
Technical, difficult. There, is that better? Good morning. My name is Charity, she, her, and today I'm going to bring reflection.
Thanks for joining us today, Charity. Okay, so let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. So this is the meeting outcome that we have for today. Big picture, we have one goal for today, and that is for the Community Council to provide staff with guidance on which application characteristics to prioritize as staff craft 2 portfolios of applications to recommend for funding. Big picture, we're going to get there by reviewing data about the application pool, and we're going to use pair work, large group conversation, solo reflection, and voting to identify specific characteristics. So if you have the public agenda by your side, you can take a look at that now. So we're going to start off with a review of the Community Council's role in the large grants funding process. Lisa is going to recap advocacy limitations, and we'll have an opportunity for council members to disclose conflicts of interest. We'll introduce the application characteristics that you'll prioritize, and you'll review data about the large grants application pool. From there, we will spend the rest of the meeting prioritizing the application characteristics. So we're going to do this by conducting an initial poll so that the council can understand your collective positions on these issues prior to doing group work. After that, we're going to go into a pair listening and discussion exercise. We're going to regroup as a full council to share learnings in a large group discussion. We're going to move to solo reflection time, and then we'll end with the official vote. So for community members and applicants who are watching this meeting, we want to let you know that we hosted small group prep meetings of 1 to 4 with all council members earlier this week. At these meetings, we brief them on the data, the process, and the decisions they'll be making in the hopes that doing so would give them time to digest the information and make more space today for discussion. We'll have 2 10-minute breaks today. The first is going to be at 10:10. And then the second is going to be at 11:45, and there will be additional coffee and snacks in time for that second break. Does anyone have any questions about today's meeting outcomes or the agenda before we move on? Okay, so Lene and Lolita, it sounds like you might have sound now. Do you want to step in and check in with us?
Good morning. Yes, thanks for working out the sound. By the head nods, I take it you can hear me too. Lene Johnson here. Sorry I'm not able to be there in person, but yeah, looking forward to spending time with you all virtually today.
Good morning, everyone. Lolita Broadus, she, her pronouns. I am looking forward to being here today. I thought the question was there a check-in question or?
What's a value or practice you're bringing today?
Absolutely. I think the value or practice that I'm going to bring today is an equity lens. Using my equity lens.
Thanks, Lolita. I'm going to second equity also. I didn't hear the check-in question, so make sure I check off that box.
Thank you both. Okay, so before we move on, I just want to encourage everyone to take care of yourself today. So go to the bathroom, get food, get water, stand up, stretch, do what you need to do. There's going to be a lot of content that we're going to be covering. And so I just want to invite you to do what you need to do to stay as engaged and present. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. Fantastic. Okay. So this will be familiar. We reviewed some of this content in October. So I'm going to spend a bit of time reviewing how the council is engaging in the large grants funding process. As a reminder of how to interpret this visual, the light blue top bars refer to activities that applicants and community members are engaged in. The yellow middle bars are places where you, our community council, and then the allocation committee are also engaged. And then the dark blue bottom boxes describe staff deliverables. I want to remind everyone who's listening that the community council is an advisory body and the allocation committee is our decision-making body. So the community council will provide staff with high-level guidance on what application characteristics to prioritize for funding. And it's going to be the allocation committee who will decide which applications to fund. Today's meeting is the first of 2 points where the Community Council will exercise its advisory power. You're going to do this by voting on 3 core questions. In general, after SCORE, what are the top 3 application characteristics that you want to prioritize for funding? If an application scores at or above the median, what are the top 3 characteristics that would deprioritize it for funding? And then if an application scores below the median, what are the top 3 characteristics that would prioritize it for funding? So you can see on this slide those questions written out. And you'll notice that all 3 of the questions center around SCORE, and this is because SCORE reflects significant community input and expertise. The council spent 3 meetings already providing staff with feedback on large grants application questions and scoring criteria, and 70% of the application points focus on how organizations and programs effectively serve priority populations and advance racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then in addition, staff recruited and trained 96 community volunteers to read and score 7 to 8 applications each. Application scores are the median of scores from 4 individual reviewers. And as you might imagine, using only SCORE does have shortcomings. For example, some applications might score highly due to strong grant writing, but the proposed program may have substantial design flaws or performance challenges. Similarly, some applications score low due to lack of grant writing experience, though they might excel in delivering effective programming and services. Next slide, please. So using council's answers to the 3 core questions alongside staff SCORE and factors for staff consideration, and I'm going to cover those factors in just a little bit. Staff are going to craft 2 portfolios of applications to recommend for funding. And you can see that in the dark blue February bar down below. And then staff are going to present these 2 portfolios at the March 3rd meeting using high-level summary data similar to the ones that you're going to see today. At that March meeting, council members are going to discuss the 2 portfolios and vote to recommend one to the allocation committee for funding. At no point in the process will council members be given identifying information or discuss individual applications. So because this is all theoretical, I'm going to walk you through an example of what this could look like in practice. So let's pretend that at today's meeting, a majority of council members vote for these 3 things. You all vote to prioritize applications from organizations without current PCL grants. You vote to deprioritize high-scoring applications serving a general population. And you vote to prioritize lower-scoring applications from large organizations. So staff would go through the list of applications using SCORE, applying council's priorities, and then the other factors that are only for staff consideration. And then they would create 2 different portfolios. And there's an example outlined on the next slide. The 2 portfolios might share some similarities, and in this example, the differences might be in how staff considered feasibility and performance challenges. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So in this example, both portfolios might include 4 of the same applications that scored median or higher and from organizations without PCL grants. Over half of the funding recommended for applications from grantee organizations for their same PCL programs due to strong performance. 45 applications from large organizations, and deprioritization of applications in general, serving a general population. The differences might include Portfolio 1 recommending funding more grants overall than Portfolio 2, a different number of grants for medium-sized organizations, more grants for high-scoring applications serving a general population in Portfolio 1 and fewer of them in Portfolio 2. And the first portfolio may include 40 applications totaling $23 million for small orgs, whereas the second portfolio may have 35 applications totaling $21 million for small orgs. So this example illustrates the ways that portfolios might differ while using the same priorities that we get from council today. They also show how staff will present the 2 portfolios to council using descriptive summary data without providing the names of recommended applications. The council will consider the different portfolios and choose one during the March 3rd meeting. So that was a lot of information, so I'll just pause and see if anyone has any questions before I move on. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Lisa to talk about conflicts of interest.
Thanks, Katrina. So I just want to remind folks that what a conflict of interest is. So you can see from looking at the slide that a conflict of interest exists if you, a council member, or an immediate member of your family have a financial relationship or have the appearance of a financial relationship with an applicant. And a financial relationship includes working or contracting for an applicant organization. Family members refer to, or immediate family members refers to a spouse, a domestic partner, a child, a sibling, or an in-law. So someone in your immediate family. So we have not disclosed the list of applicants to council members. However, if you work for an organization that you know has applied for PCL funds, or if a member of your family works for an organization that you know has applied for PCL funds, you need to disclose that conflict. If you volunteer for an organization you know has applied for PCL funding, you're not required to disclose that conflict. You may disclose your connection if you choose to. So while the council is not making recommendations on individual applications, you will be voting to prioritize applications based on certain characteristics, and that includes program area. Declaring conflicts assures that your colleagues pardon me, and the public are aware of council members' affiliations with applicants, and it supports the city's value of transparency. So I want to just check and make sure that folks understand what a conflict is in this situation and whether you have to declare it if there's any questions. Jacob?
I just want to mention, I've made it clear that I do work for a community foundation that may give grants to organizations that are applying for PCL. No one has mentioned, nor do I disclose my affiliation to PCL to grantees, but just for the record, there may be some grantee overlap.
Thanks, Lene. And that's not, again, a required conflict, but it's good so people know where you're coming from. I'm sorry, Jacob, I didn't mean to
you're
off
good.
there.
I work for Feed the Mass, and we have applied for PCL funding.
And this is Alex. I work for the YWCA of Greater Portland, and we have also applied for funding.
Okay, is that the sum total? Okay, great. Thanks, folks. And Katrina, did you want me to also go over advocacy limitations? Because you mentioned that, but we did cover that at the last meeting. Is anybody uncertain about what the advocacy limitations are? I'm happy to do that if there's any confusion. Great. Thanks.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and move on to the application characteristics. So these are the characteristics that the council will be prioritizing today. And big picture, just as a definition, I want to name that they are descriptive facts about applications. And in this case, they can be broadly grouped into 5 categories that you see on the slide. We have PCL's program areas, recent PCL funding status, the size of the organization that applied, the populations that the application is proposing to serve, and the funding priorities that they are proposing to address. So I'll walk through each of these categories one by one. Next slide, please. Fantastic. So program area. So PCL has 6 program areas: after school, child abuse prevention and intervention, early childhood, foster care, hunger relief, and mentoring. The allocation committee has already allocated funding ranges for each program area. They've allocated a low end and a high end. Prioritizing one or some program areas over others would result in staff crafting portfolios that allocate resources accordingly. You'll also notice that there is a characteristic in the voting list titled, quote, balance of all, no priority, and you'll see this in subsequent categories. So selecting this characteristic indicates that you want a balance of all of the characteristics in that category and that you don't want to prioritize one characteristic in that category over another. Awesome. So recent PCL funding status is a category that describes whether or not the applicant currently receives PCL funding, and it includes these 4 characteristics. The first one is grantee org same program. This refers to applications from grantee orgs who are requesting funding for the same program that they currently get our funding for. The second bullet is grantee org different program. This refers to applications from organizations that currently receive our funding, but they are requesting funding for a program that does not currently receive PCL funding. The third bullet is org without PCL funds. This refers to applications from organizations that don't currently receive our funding. Many of these organizations requested funding to continue existing programming in their communities, and some requested funding to start new programming. So prioritizing one of these characteristics could result in staff crafting portfolios that emphasize stable funding for current PCL-funded programs and clients, or it could shift funds to other programs. So big picture, to be eligible for PCL large grants, organizations need annual revenues of at least $750,000. And based on the distribution of applications that we received, staff created the following groupings. Small orgs, which have annual revenues under 6 million, medium orgs, annual revenues between 6 and 18 million, large orgs with annual revenues over 18 million. So prioritizing size of org would result in staff crafting portfolios that focus funds on organizations of a particular size. Focus population. So this is the category that describes the community or communities that the application proposes to serve. Applicants answered questions about who they propose to serve and their expertise doing so. As a result, scores reflect the extent to which an organization and proposed service has strong culturally relevant or specific experience and success with the population. Staff analyzed application data and grouped applications 3 ways. First, we have general population multicultural. These applications propose to serve all or most of PCL's priority populations. BIPOC focus. These applications propose to serve Black, Indigenous, and children of color, and some other priority populations, such as LGBTQ+ youth, youth with disabilities, and or houseless families. The third bullet is specific focus. These applications propose to serve 1 to 2 specific racial or ethnic priority populations and or 1 to 2 other priority populations. The groupings are not perfect or exact. Keep in mind, all programs funded by PCL are open to all children, youth, and families. Prioritizing one of these groupings would result in staff crafting portfolios that reach PCL priority populations in either more focused or more general ways. And in crafting portfolios, staff will ensure that all PCL priority populations are served across all program areas. Funding priorities. So this category describes how many funding priorities an application proposes to serve. The council recommended and the allocation committee adopted funding priorities for each program area based on community engagement results. Applications indicate which funding priorities they address, and the total number per program area ranges from 4 to 7. Staff created 3 options based on the distribution of applications, and you can see them on this slide. Applications that address 1 to 2 funding priorities, applications that address 3 or more. And then there's also the option to ensure that all funding priorities are covered in all portfolios. Choosing among these options would result in staff crafting portfolios that reach some or all funding priorities. Okay, so before we close this section, I want to speak about an additional set of factors that we won't be discussing today. Staff will evaluate 4 additional factors in making funding recommendations: the feasibility and scale of the proposed program, the financial health of the organization, the past performance of current grantee programs, and the cost of the proposed programs in the context of program scale and size. So at times, staff may remove an application from consideration due to 1 or more of these factors. Finally, I want to close by sharing that prioritization of a handful of application characteristics does not mean that the final 2 portfolios will only include applications with those characteristics. Prioritization means that the portfolio will be weighted in favor of those characteristics where possible. These decisions are taking place within the context of the finite resources available, and staff will use a combination of score, council priorities, and these 4 factors to craft 2 portfolios of applications to recommend for funding. So please know that the portfolios that we bring you in March will be staff's best effort at reflecting the priorities you give us today. So any questions about the application characteristics or the process before we move on to the data about the application pool? Okay, I'll turn it over to Meg.
All right. I'm going to invite everyone to take a deep breath. You just sat through a lot of information, and I have a lot more to give you. And again, just a reminder for folks who might be tuning in to this meeting on our website right now, the group sitting here at this table has already heard this information one time, so we're just going to be reviewing it again and sharing it for the public. All right. So this slide helps you understand how our current funding process and application process compares to our most recent one in 2019-20. So in our most recent funding process, we received 168 applications, which is a 45% increase from 2019. These applications total $222 million in total funding requested over 3 years, and that's nearly double the amount that was requested in our last funding process in 2019. The total funding available that the levy has to grant is $64.7 million over 3 years. This is a 5.4% decrease from 2019 and a decrease from our current funding levels. The decrease is due in part to projected revenue decline and in part to the levy spending down a fund balance that was allocated to grants in 2019. To help review this greater number of applications, we recruited and trained 96 community volunteers with lived and professional experience in the levy's 6 program areas and priority populations. This was 50% more reviewers than we worked with in 2019. Overall, the growth in applications and in this process likely comes from PCL staff's outreach to ensure potential applicants knew about this funding opportunity. We tried to identify organizations that are working in our 6 program areas and serving PCL's priority populations with children and families in Portland. We had a 200% increase in the number of applications from organizations that do not currently have a levy grant. So while on the previous slide we looked at the increase in applications and dollars requested, including from organizations without levy grants, the next 2 slides are to help understand where we are now with current grant investments. It's important context to reflect on as you begin to consider the characteristics to prioritize. So the levy requires annual grant reporting from all PCL-funded programs. Reports include understanding enrollment in services, how well children, youth, and families attend or participate, the program activities offered, the extent to which program activities are offered in the way that grantees had planned, and client outcomes. Reporting also includes demographics of the children and youth served and the demographics of grantee staff and board members. The demographic data collected includes gender, race and ethnicity, age, primary language in the home, zip code of the child's residence or where they attend school, socioeconomic status, and disability. We have much more extensive data than we are showing on this slide, but we wanted to share with you a big picture on how the levy funds currently reach PCL's priority populations and with what types of grantee partners and providers. The levy currently reaches around 10,000 children annually, and 77% of them identify as Black, Indigenous, and children of color. Nearly half live or attend school in East Portland, and nearly 40% speak a primary language in the home other than English. Over 50 primary languages are reported to us. Among children and youth served in after-school and mentoring programs through our partnerships with local school districts, we know that 22% qualify for special education and/or 504 plan. We currently have 50 grantee organization partners with over 80 grants. Among those 50 partners, 44 provided data on the demographics of their staff and board members. Among those organizations reporting the data, well over half of them have majority Black, Indigenous, and people of color staff and board members. These data have been similar for the past several years. Next slide, please. Okay. We're pausing just for a minute, team. Seems like the slide share may have stopped working. While they troubleshoot the slide share, I am going to talk through the next slide because it doesn't have a graph. It's more big picture information about current Levy grant program progress. So as I mentioned earlier, PCL monitors grants through regular reporting, and we wanted to share with you some trends that we've observed over the past 4 years. Thanks, Erica. Some trends that we've observed over the past 4 years, which includes reporting from programs during the pandemic and throughout pandemic recovery. The trends I'm talking about are in the aggregate across all of our programs in these program areas, so not everything I'm saying is true for every program. But collectively, in our after-school, mentoring, and foster care program areas, we have seen challenges with programs reaching full enrollment. Across programs in child abuse prevention, intervention, and foster care, we've seen challenges with them being able to provide the amount of service they had planned and projected to offer. And in after-school mentoring programs, we've seen challenges with enrolled youth attending the programming regularly. On a positive note, for children, youth, and families that enrolled and regularly attended program services offered across all program areas, they reached outcome goals. In our early childhood and child abuse prevention intervention program areas, we have typically seen full enrollment in those programs. And across the hunger relief programs, we've typically seen them reach all or most of their service goals. I'm also going to talk through our next slide, which also didn't have a graph. And, I want to bring us back to the topic of scores in this current funding process. So as Katrina said earlier, oh, we're back with slides. This is exciting. The scores in this process are likely correlated with an organization and program's ability to serve priority populations and advance racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. This is because over the 3 meetings where you all helped us shape the application questions and scoring criteria, you lifted up that focus on racial equity, diversity, and inclusion in such a way that 70% of the possible points on the applications are highly focused on issues of equity. This means score will likely be highly correlated with an application's strength and focus on racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, and their ability to deliver effective programming and services for PCL priority populations. Good job, team, on the troubleshooting. So now we're going to dig into some data on the characteristics that you will be voting to prioritize. This graph starts with our program area category of characteristics. You can see here all 6 of PCL's program areas, and it looks at the total amount of funding requested over 3 years in each program area compared to the total amount of funding available in each of the program areas. The blue bars on the left are the amount of funding requested over 3 years, and the orange bars on the right are the amount of funding available at the low end of the range that the allocation committee allocated. We don't have enough resources to allocate at the high end in every program area. So we're showing the low end so that you can understand the gap between what's requested and what's available. The after-school and mentoring program areas received over half of the total applications submitted and nearly half of the dollars requested. The gap between funding requested and funding available is largest for those 2 program areas. It is smallest for foster care and hunger relief program areas. This slide shows you the number of applications, again, received in each of the program areas and the median score on applications in each of the program areas. The maximum score possible was 152 points. Median score is highest for the foster care applications and lowest for the child abuse prevention intervention applications. It's important to keep in mind that scores vary based on several factors, including quality of the applications, grant writing, program design proposed, but also quality of reviewers and their interpretation of the scoring criteria. While we saw on the previous slide that demand for dollars and number of applications is higher in after-school and mentoring, median scores on those applications are not highest. This graph looks at the category of characteristics around recent PCL funding status. The whole pie here is all 168 applications received by the levy. The slide shows the number and portion of applications based on the organization's recent funding status with the levy. applications from grantee organizations for the same program that the levy is currently funding, applications from grantee organizations for a different program that the levy doesn't currently fund, and applications from organizations that don't currently have levy grants. Over half of all applications are from PCL grantee organizations. Most of those are to continue funding the same program that the levy is currently funding at those organizations, and a small number, only 11% of all applications, are to fund a different program at an organization that is currently a levy grantee. We received 76 applications, or 45% of the total, from organizations that do not currently receive levy grants, and further analysis shows that the majority of these applications are in after-school and mentoring. For the other program areas, the majority of applications are from organizations that currently have a levy grant. This slide looks at the size of organization characteristic and their recent PCL funding status characteristic. This slide shows the number of applications based on the size of the organization, those are the three groupings of bars, according to their annual revenue in the last closed fiscal year. The blue bars show the number of applications from grantee organizations, and the gray bars show the number of applications from organizations without levy funds. Please keep in mind that organizations had to have revenues of $750,000 to apply for this fund. Anything below that is eligible for Levy's future small grants round. These data illustrate that applications from organizations without levy grants tend to be smaller organizations, while applications from organizations with current levy grants tend to be from larger organizations. Further analysis indicates that after-school and mentoring have proportionally more applications from smaller organizations compared to the other four program areas. This slide shows the median score for applications based on recent PCL funding status and size of organization. Applications from grantee organizations had a higher median score than applications from organizations without levy money. Similarly, applications from large organizations had a higher median score than applications from small organizations. Our team did not find this to be a surprising set of findings. Organizations with levy history tend to be larger organizations, as we saw in the previous slide. They have experience in our past application processes, and in general, larger organizations tend to have more grant writing capacity and experience compared to smaller organizations. I want to pause there for a minute in case there are any questions on the past few slides I've covered and before we turn our attention to other characteristics in the data. Okay. Oh, go ahead, Stephen.
I do have a question. This is, I think, the strengths and challenges of the current grantees slide. I'm wondering if you could share any more information you have on like why for certain programs there's under enrollment, and for others they do have consistent enrollment, and even if you might know if there's even higher demand for those programs that do have consistent or full enrollment.
Great question. I should have said earlier, for the programs that were struggling across the board, whether it's with enrollment or with kids reaching or attending regularly, many of those programs had significant staff turnover and staff vacancies this year. So across the sector, we're seeing that it is challenging for organizations to attract and keep staff in order to reach their goals. If there aren't enough staff there, you can't do outreach to get it full enrollment. And if staff are turning over, children and families don't have consistent relationships with staff in the program, so they may not be regularly attending. So those are kind of the key, that's probably the biggest factor that we've seen. And so for programs, I think, that are reaching full enrollment, there's more stability of staffing there. In early childhood, I think in particular, that program area, children show up because their family brings them. Same with our child abuse prevention intervention area, as opposed to in after school and mentoring, there's a lot of things competing for kids' time. So I think those are kind of the biggest differences in types of program, and then staffing is really a factor that cuts across all of them. I want to turn it over to my teammates to see if anybody has anything to add.
I would just add that certain ages of children are harder to engage, like middle school and seniors in high school tend to be harder to keep at full enrollment, and that is something that's definitely reflected in the mentoring portfolio. Yeah.
And I would add in the after-school portfolio that there were some significant disruptions related to this teacher strike and the storm that affected some programs and their continuity of services. And we've also seen some challenges with transportation for programs that are site-based that are serving, for example, like a specific, culturally specific population. As those families are dispersing and moving away from the central area where they used to be located, more programs are having trouble with getting their children, the transportation they need to come and attend services. So there's a combination of factors.
All right. Yuxing, can we, go to the first, there you go, thank you, perfect. So the next few slides we're gonna discuss, we'll look at focus population in the applications. This graph shows the number of applications that propose to serve each of the priority populations that are listed on this slide. We have a second slide that looks at the priority populations by race and ethnicity. On this slide, for example, of the 168 applications received, 151 of them propose to serve families earning low incomes. This does not mean that the other 17 are proposing to serve families with a high income. It just means that those 17 selected other focus populations other than income. So please keep in mind, as you look at the data on this slide and the next slide, that many applications proposed to serve multiple priority populations, each of which is counted separately for this graph. For example, a single application may have proposed to serve every group on this slide, and some did, or an application may have proposed to serve only a few of the populations on this slide, and some did. This slide helps you understand the number of times each of these populations was selected as a focus population across all applications. This graph shows the number of applications that propose to serve PCL priority populations by race and ethnicity. Of the 168 applications received, for example, 129 proposed to serve African children and youth. This does not mean that they only propose to serve that population. Once again, keep in mind that many applications propose to serve multiple priority populations. And again, for example, a single application may have proposed to serve every race ethnicity population listed on this slide, or only a few. This slide helps you understand the number of times these populations were selected as a focus population across all applications. This graph looks at the population data a little bit differently. This graph compares groups of applications based on two categories of characteristics. The first characteristic, based on the two big bars that you see here, the top and bottom bar, are comparing organizations that have current levy grants, applications from organizations that have current levy grants, that's the bottom bar, to applications from organizations that don't have levy grants. Each bar is broken down further by focus population. As a reminder, the data that we used here is based on what applicants said in their applications. This graph illustrates that a higher number and proportionally more applications from grantee organizations have a specific population focus compared to applications from organizations without levy grants. Applications from levy grantees, as we noted earlier, tend to be larger organizations, and 41% of them proposed to focus on a few PCL priority populations. By comparison, applications from organizations without levy grants, as we saw earlier, tend to be smaller organizations, 40% of which propose to serve general multicultural population. Many, but not all of the applications with a BIPOC focus or a specific focus came from culturally specific programs. Many, but not all. And similarly, some culturally specific programs propose to serve a general multicultural population and not have a specific focus. So we created these other population groupings to help us understand the applicant pool's variation by population served. This slide shows that the median score for application characteristics based on population served, and it varied minimally between these three groupings. This table suggests that score is not correlated with the degree to which applications have a broad or specific population focus. I just want to pause there before we go to the last 3 data slides. You all are doing great. Okay. All right. Last 3 slides are focused on the PCL funding priorities in each of the program areas. This slide starts with our after-school and mentoring program areas. On the left, you see the number of applications in each of the program areas, and you see the funding priorities in each of the program areas. Keep in mind that the funding priorities came from community engagement that you all helped shape, and you all helped discuss and edit those funding priorities, and then the allocation committee also edited and then approved them. This graph looks at the number of applications addressing each funding priority in these program areas. A funding priority was counted each time an application addressed it. So for example, if an application proposed to address 3 funding priorities, each priority is counted in the graph. The numbers next to the bars show you the number of applications proposing to serve those funding priorities. This graph illustrates that in these 2 program areas, all funding priorities are well covered across all the applications. And in fact, in after-school and mentoring, most applications proposed to address most or all of the funding priorities. This slide, like the last one, is constructed the same way, but it's looking at our child abuse prevention, intervention, and foster care program areas. This graph illustrates that in these 2 program areas, again, all funding priorities are well covered across all the applications. Among the 24 applications in child abuse prevention intervention, the majority are addressing 5 funding priorities. And in these 2 program areas, the funding priorities where the fewest applications are addressing them is still covered by at least 7 applications. This means that no funding priority is unaddressed or only addressed in a few applications. In our final slide, this looks at the funding priorities in hunger relief and early childhood program areas. And again, all funding priorities are well covered across all applications. In early childhood, most applications address at least 3 funding priorities. In hunger relief, the majority of applications address 3 out of the 5 funding priorities. The funding priorities where the fewest applications are addressing them are still addressed by at least 7 applications. This means, again, that no funding priority is unaddressed or only addressed in a few applications. That concludes the data. I want to open it up to questions.
I do have a question. I don't know if it was already maybe captured in the slides, but is there a ranking of need in terms of needs that have been met or not, and whether applications match up to the need?
That's a great question. The funding priorities essentially, I don't want to call it a ranking of need because need varied based on who identified the need in different priority populations. But the funding priorities are the result of sort of a ranking of need. So I would say that all of those funding priorities are equally important for the most part. Does anyone on my team want to chime in and add more? No? Okay. Does that help, Alejandra?
Okay, so that is most of the talking that we are going to do today. We're going to have a 10-minute break. So it's 9:53. We'll reconvene at 10:03. For council members who are here, if you haven't already, go ahead and take out your laptop, connect to the guest Wi-Fi, and then pull up your personal email that has those links in it that I sent you last night. So that way those are accessible when we get to the different polling and online tool options. And then don't click on any of the links yet, though. And if you have any trouble with any of that, please reach out to Brian, and Brian will help you. So 10-minute break, and we'll reconvene at 10:03. Okay. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started now. Okay, so let's see. So I'll go ahead and set us up for all the group work that we're going to move into. So we're going to work on prioritizing the application characteristics now. And we're going to do this by having the council discuss and vote on the 3 core questions that I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. They are, in general, after score, what are the top 3 characteristics that you want to prioritize for funding? The second question is, if an application scores at or above the median, what are the top 3 characteristics that would deprioritize it for funding? And then the third question is, if an application scores below the median, what are the top 3 characteristics that would prioritize it for funding? So we're going to start off with an initial poll of these questions. Okay, so we're going to do a poll first, and then you will answer all 3 of the questions, and then we'll go ahead and review the results together. And in that way, hopefully we'll get a sense of the council's initial thinking. And then from there, we'll do pair, group, and individual work, and then we'll return to the exact same 3 questions and conduct an official vote using Microsoft Forms. So it is this closing and official vote that will be used by staff to create 2 portfolios. Thank you, Yuxing. Okay. So, yeah, great. So after the initial poll, we're going to do an hour of pair work. So you're going to have 20 minutes per pair to dig into each question. And you're going to rotate partners for each question as well. And we're going to use the same method that we used in October. So in each pair, one member is going to share and answer questions while the other council member listens and asks questions. You'll have 10 minutes before switching roles so that each person in each pair has the opportunity to both listen and share. Because we're an odd number, we're going to have one group of 3 for each question. And whenever you're in a group of 3, you'll actually get 6 minutes per person. And I'll cue all of this when you're in the pairs. So when you're in the speaking role, I want you to share which characteristics you selected and why. And when you're in the listening role, I really want you to practice listening deeply, checking your assumptions, putting aside your judgment, and asking questions to understand why your fellow council member holds the perspective they do. So please refrain from trying to respond to them and try instead to listen to understand. You might not have time to discuss all 3 characteristics mentioned, so please focus on the 1 or 2 that spark the most interest for you. And I put some example questions up there for you to follow up with, but they could include things along the lines of, what I'm hearing you say is X. Did I hear you correctly? Can you tell me more about why? I don't understand A. Can you explain it in a different way? Or when you prioritize or say B, I assume C. Is my assumption correct? In general, why questions are always good. So we'll have these roles and example questions up on the screen for you to reference during pair work. So after pair work, we're going to take another break, and then we'll reconvene for 30 minutes of group discussion on what surfaced during the pair work. We'll move to 10 minutes of quiet solo reflection. And during that time, you'll have the option to work on the whiteboard, do some solo journaling, take a walk, go to the bathroom, do whatever you need to do to kind of gather your thoughts in a way that is helpful for you before the official vote. So any questions on process before we go to taking the initial poll? No, okay. Okay, so Yuxing, you can go ahead and stop sharing screen, and then I am going to go into the poll, and I'm going to start accepting responses. So you can go ahead and go into your email, and okay, I just opened the poll. So if you click on the link that says initial poll, you should now be able to access the poll and start voting. So let me know if you have any issues with that.
I am still trying to hunt down the link. I clicked on this link, it's blank. But I'm going into my email and you said you sent it last night. I have 3 documents from last night.
Lolita, did the link that I chatted you directly in the chat work?
No,
It did not work, or you don't have it?
it did not. It did.
I
Oh, there it is.
I
I must
just
have been
sent.
clicking on it too early. Thank you.
It sounds like it's working for you now, Lolita.
Yeah.
Okay. So for folks who are watching the live stream, just know we'll take about 5 to 10 minutes to vote. And then once all the votes are in, we'll go ahead and share the results of this initial poll. So hang tight if you're watching virtually.
just making sure. Can you just vote for 2? Okay.
We're just waiting for one more response. There we go. Okay. Okay, all the responses are in, so just give me about 30 seconds to pull this up and project it on the screen.
Yuxing is helping so that everyone in this room will be able to see the results on the screen, and so will folks who are watching the stream of this meeting. It's okay. Katrina's going to zoom it in a little bit for us so we can see it. It's all right. So in this first question, in general, after SCORE, what are the top 3 application characteristics you want to prioritize for funding? It looks like there are the top concentration is around 3 out of 9 votes. So starting at the top, it looks like there's some variation in the program area characteristic, and it looks like the one for a balance with no priority has 3 out of 9. And then the next one in recent levy funding status, it looks like small organizations, 3 out of 9 people. But there's some variation in recent levy funding status as well, some without priority and some for organizations that don't have a current levy grant. And then in population, it appears that there are 3 out of 9 for focus on BIPOC children and families, and 3 out of 9 with a specific focus population, applications with specific focus population. And I think I've covered all that had 3 out of 9. So that was in general. So this is the question around if an application scores at or above median, what are the top 3 application characteristics that would deprioritize it for funding? And again, here it looks like 3 out of 9 is the highest number of you where there's some level of agreement or concentration. In program area, 3 out of 9 with sort of no priority in that area. In population, 3 out of 9 were general or multicultural focus. And then in funding priorities, ensure that all funding priorities are covered in the portfolios.
Can I ask a question? I'm not sure if I follow what it means in this case for a balance of all. And my understanding of the question is if like one application scores at above the median, then what would deprioritize it? And can one application have a balance of all?
I don't think it's an application that has balance of all. It is this you want us not to prioritize elements of that characteristic and just balance it entirely. So for program area, it's not an application that addressed all program areas. That wasn't an option. The vote here means that you don't have a priority for applications in one program area over another. So where it says for deprioritizing applications.
So tactically, would this mean like you would have a set of applications that are or at or above the median, and you would just ensure a distribution across like the program areas versus deprioritizing one? Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
I was worried that I read the question wrong, and so I was panicking. But then the way Stephen's question was gonna be my question, and it's answered. I read it right. We're good.
But it looks like the vote is kind of split between the first one of like prioritize all of them, and then the second one deprioritize all of them, of like 3 votes for each.
Makes me want to skip this question next time around. But all right.
Oh, no, we're not gonna do it.
Okay. Yeah, let's look at the thing. Well, this is why you all will break up into small groups and talk with each other. Okay, so for this one, if an application scores below the median, what are the top 3 characteristics that you would prioritize it for funding? This is the one place where so far 4 out of 9 of you had a similar answer. So 4 out of 9 of you are saying if the application scores below median, organizations without a Levy grant would be prioritized for funding. 3 of you are saying small organizations, and another 3 of you are saying specific focus populations. There's a lot. Oh, and I missed this one. And 3 of you are saying hunger relief. So there's variation, again, where there's 1 or 2 of you, but 3s and 4s are where there are more of you.
Okay. Let me stop sharing. Okay, so we're going to move into pair work. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to split everyone into pairs, and I'm going to count folks off into 2 groups. There's going to be the seated group, and if you're in the seated group, you're going to stay seated. If you're in the moving group, you're going to stand up and move around. And the moving group will move clockwise for each pair conversation. Yeah, that way, yep. To the left, yep, to the left. And for virtual council members, we're going to put you in the seated group, and we're going to break you out into a laptop here in person. We have an odd number of people, so Stephen has volunteered to be the person who's going to be the 3rd person in a pair each time, and so Stephen has his own set of instructions. But just know that if you are a group of 3, instead of having 10 minutes each to share, you'll have 6 minutes each to share. Okay, so Lene and Lolita, you will be in the seated group, and then Jamie and Alex, if you can be in the moving group, and you'll join Brian once it comes time to sit at the 2 laptops there to join Lene and Lolita. And then, do you mind, Jacob, do you mind starting off counting as seated and then moving, seated and then moving? Great. And then Stephen will be our 3rd mover. Fantastic. So for the pairs who are over here on my side of the table, you can just start off with each other working. Just remember if you're seated or moving. And then Jamie and Alex, you can move over to the hybrid setup, and then Stephen, you can come over to this side. And then once you're all settled, we'll go ahead and start the count. And so let's see. Yuxing, do you mind sharing slides for me real fast? So in this first pair, what you're going to talk about is the first question, which is, in general, after SCORE, what are the top 3 application characteristics that you want to prioritize for funding? And so it will be this question, one person will speak, the other person will listen, and then you'll switch. There we are. So, the characteristics. We don't have a list, but I could pull one up. Okay, yeah, you can pull up the poll. That works too.
Oh, yeah, pull up the
Yeah.
poll.
I can also share here. You know what? Actually, why don't I project the results of the conversation up so that way you can see them live? And then you can see the options as well. Okay, here we go. So you can go ahead and move into pair work. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and regroup. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move to large group discussion. And so the prompts for this discussion that we're going to center the conversation are, what did you learn that you didn't know before? And did something shift for you in the course of the conversation? And if so, why? So I'll go ahead and open it up to Lene and Lolita first. Just since you're virtual, I just wanted to ask if you had anything off the bat that you wanted to chime in with. And then after that, I'll open it up to the folks in person.
Well, I will share that in my last group, Stephen had mentioned, or we were trying to talk through some clarifying questions. I didn't write down what those clarifying questions were, but Kamala and I also thought that they were great points. So, Stephen, you want to reference your paper?
Should I ask now? No. Okay, I think one of them was, I'm trying to remember, in some of the groups, it was like a balance of, all priorities or balance of all. Would that mean it's balanced by like total dollars allocated or balanced by total number of grants across the priority areas?
Lisa, I'm wondering if you could take that question.
I'm not sure you could say ahead of time because it's going to probably depend somewhat. I mean, like, again, to say you prioritize something, it's also in scale for what maybe have been requested, right? So it wouldn't be even. I'm not sure that saying that you're not prioritizing amongst, that you're balancing, means that everything would be even, but you're not weighting toward one. That's the best? Does that answer your question? I'm not sure if it answers your question.
Kind of. I guess to confirm, choosing a balance across priorities doesn't necessarily mean we're striving for like completely the same amount of dollars across. It just means it's going to be like we're not weighting one priority. Okay.
I mean, for example, there were different allocation ranges for each program area, right? So they couldn't, like, everything couldn't be exactly even because, and also you have different, each program area looks different in terms of its application characteristics, right? They're not all the same, as you saw. Mm-hmm. So it can't, like, balancing doesn't mean even, but it means not weighting. Mm-hmm. That's.
Yeah, thank you.
Lene and Lolita, feel free to jump in at any point. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to folks who are in the room. So once again, the discussion prompts are, what did you learn that you didn't know before? And did something shift for you in conversation and why? Yeah, Jacob, please jump on in.
Well, I think the complexities of and I felt like it happened in each discussion, was the complexities of large versus small organizations and everything in between. It's just, I think if we're going into it, it's like a good faith effort when we talk about all the organizations, that all organizations are going to, use the funds responsibly and that they have the best intentions behind it. And, what is the impact versus, return on these investments of a organization going into, getting those funds, and how many people are going to be affected, and the idea of a large organization having a track record of being able to come through and be able to do the programming that they said they would, versus a small organization who maybe their wants, and this is an opportunity for them to achieve their wants, but also I think for the for small organizations is they know how to better manage what little they have. So it's just that back and forth is hard when we say, hey, we want to prioritize a small organization over a large organization, but it's like it's choosing the greater good between both kind of thing, and that's for me, it's very hard.
Can I ask a question, which Jacob's point makes me think about? When staff are going to create the portfolios, it seems that the score will be the primary driving factor, right? These priorities that we're going to vote on will just be they'll influence the portfolios and kind of shift things slightly, but I guess I ask that because what you were saying makes me think, ultimately, the primary factor is the quality of the application and our belief that this program will have an impact. And we do want to consider large organizations and their, contexts versus small organizations. So that might slightly shift it, but not mean that we're just biased towards small organizations. Is that a fair assumption? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, people are nodding their heads, and I just wanted to say for folks who are listening in virtually, yes, that is a fair characterization. Does anyone else on our team want to add anything to that?
Can I add something about small organizations?
Yeah, sure.
Just to clarify, some of the small organizations were in the Small Grants Fund and so have a track record. And remembering that the definition of small could be up to 6 million, so it doesn't necessarily mean they're a startup that doesn't have any history. It just means they're small relative to some of the other applicants in the whole portfolio. So.
And I guess I would just add that I would say that prioritizing something doesn't mean that if you prioritize something that we won't do any of the things that are not the priority. Does that make sense? Right, so it's sort of like, how do the priorities tip weight toward one thing than another? That's more what we're seeking, I think. Is that a fair statement? Okay.
Clarifying question, but that doesn't mean that there's going to be more funding, the higher end of that funding scale may or may not be applied if it's tipped in that direction. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Can you?
In response to what you were saying if we're prioritizing a specific area, does it mean that we're not going to fund or weight the others that weren't prioritized? It just meant that it's going to tip in the direction of the priorities. So I'm wondering, is that tip number of grants to said program, or the scale of funding will be tipped in that program?
Well, it could be either.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll add that in some of my conversations, we were talking about how to look at programs that meet multiple priorities, or maybe one or two, and how to sort of just on its surface be able to, how it's sort of challenging to prioritize because a program could be doing amazing work, but because it just has a very strong focus in one or two, whereas some organizations are doing so much it's diluting their ability to really have that deep, meaningful impact. So it was interesting in the different conversations hearing different perspectives around that.
Could I follow up on that? I'm wondering if there's a correlation between size of organization and number of funding priorities. Do larger organizations address more areas or not?
That's a great question, Alejandra, and I did not analyze the data that way. I could try to look and come back to you while we're here. I can try. Go ahead, Stephen.
Can I ask you a clarifying question that is connected? Applications represent a program of an organization, right? And so in those last few categories that say 1 to 2 priorities versus 3 or more, those represent like one program trying to serve 3 or more priority areas. Okay, so they can be a part of an organization that is also serving even more than that. But I think that's an important nuance, right? Yeah.
It's the priorities. So an application is for a program area. So it's the priorities that they've selected in that area. And I would say, like, in my portfolio, the majority of people chose all of the funding priorities. So I had to like dig into, or all or most, like more than 4. There's like 6 or 7 priorities and funding priorities and mentoring. So I'd have to dig into the application to know more about it.
Okay.
I would just say in after school and mentoring, where most applications were addressing most or all of the funding priorities, those are also the 2 program areas where we have proportionally more applications from small organizations, which suggests to me that there is not a difference between the number of funding priorities that an application proposes to address and the size of the organization. I will double check that, but just to answer your question, Alejandra, without digging into the data, what we do know, we can draw some conclusions from.
Thanks, Meg. That's helpful. And I don't want to confuse things more here, but now I'm wondering if an organization is checking off different priority areas, does that mean then when they are reviewed for effectiveness, do they have to address every one of those program areas and show effectiveness in every area that they've?
They had to show effectiveness with the proposed program that they have in their application. And the proposed program that they have in their application may be addressing multiple funding priorities. Collectively, how they address multiple funding priorities with that program design was what they had to show effectiveness with. And as Erica just said, quietly over here, with their goals. So they had to outline kind of what their program is, how it meets the funding priorities, and how it has been successful in the past, if it's a program that exists and they want the levy to help it continue funding, or they had to demonstrate experience and impact in other ways that suggest that a new program they want to operate has a good chance of also being successful. And that was part of what the reviewers scored. Do my teammates want to add anything to that?
I would just want to remind people that there probably was some level of self-selection and people applying, whether they address these funding priorities, because that is in the eligibility sort of section. So it's not surprising that many of the programs that ended up submitting an application address most of these priorities because they saw themselves when they were doing the screening side of it. The ones who were not doing that type of work probably didn't bother applying. So it's not surprising to me, I guess, to see that. That you saw people not applying if they were not doing that type of work.
Can I ask for the current grantees, do you all have a sense of, I don't know, maybe even going back to their applications, if they did select multiple or most of the priorities, and how their focus on multiple priorities may impact their efficacy, if at all? I'm trying to understand if our assumption that I was in the same group with Kamala, we were talking about, if a program area is serving too many areas, are they diluting their service and thus not as effective? But I think what I'm hearing is that a lot of applicants and potential grantees do select multiple service areas, and maybe that doesn't necessarily mean that they are less effective.
I think some applicants interpreted the funding priorities broadly. Like, one of the funding priorities in mentoring is like preventing gang violence, and looking through, most people click that one. It was like, if we do all of these things, youth won't do this thing, and there are some that are like more specific in there, but like a lot of people saw this as achieving that, and so it's just, I think some funding priorities are interpreted broadly.
think as a younger grant writer, when I used to, it would be like, this would be more competitive if I click more boxes, even if the focus of the project wasn't necessarily meant to equally represent 4 different categories. Then if it did touch on one area, like if we serve snacks, is that hunger relief? Maybe, but it would be more likely. I felt like earlier in when I was like learning grant writing, which maybe many of these smaller organizations might have younger grant writers, is that they think, yes, check, 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 check. That's going to look better than if I just check one and it's like a more focused program. It won't be as competitive.
I would agree with that. I would also add that in your question about sort of previous grantees, current grantees, we see some grantees that are, in my portfolio, I'm thinking of some grantees that are large, that really what they do, I wasn't part of the application process, but I would imagine they would really only select one activity, one funding priority, but they serve a really broad group of students or youth, and they do really effective work doing that. And I also have some culturally specific organizations that are much smaller, serving a much sort of more centrally located population. They do a lot more deeper work with those folks, so they probably do more across what you would consider the different funding priorities. But I would say their impact is different because they're going deeper with a smaller pool of people. So I don't necessarily think that there's a direct correlation because it's all related to size and other contextual factors.
I would agree with that. I would say I didn't see that trend of selecting all the breaking down by large or small or new or current. Even ones that I know are more specifically focused still clicked multiple priorities. And so, yeah, but then it's like, I know this program, so I know it's more focused on this or more focused on that.
So it makes me question if like, I guess maybe we should put a note on it in the future, like if this should be a question that we kind of maybe should bring up in the beginning, is like, how would we weight a lot of these choices for grants so we can maybe make it easier for us, I think, in the end of like, hey, we want, are we looking for grants that are more, streamlined, where it's like very specifically culturally focused, but then again, I think it's like a two-edged sword. It's like then we're going to be eliminating a lot of people who are, I guess, more general, but I don't know. I would love to open that up for a discussion just for a second.
Well, since you bring up populations, this was an area that I think I discussed with every person that I moved around in terms of impact. So originally my thinking was like looking at more specific populations, because I'm thinking more impact, the more, focused you are, the more impact. But then after discussion with other folks, I kind of moved away from that towards more like BIPOC, because I felt like you could be specific, but be a little bit more broad. So I'm just wondering how other folks landed on that, or if you had discussions about it.
I think for myself, this is Lene here. One of the things that came up in the one-on-ones was like there's overuse or like oversaturation of BIPOC, and sometimes folks aren't actually reaching those populations. And that's kind of why I was leaning a little bit towards like focused population, because they're clear, it's very measurable of like, are they reaching who they say they're reaching, right? But then on the other hand, BIPOC is a way to, kind of group certain marginalized communities together. But I would wonder if there are any metrics that the staff are looking at to make sure that the percentage of students or families they're serving do weigh heavily or on the side of BIPOC versus general. Because sometimes you can say you're reaching BIPOC, but then 10% of your participant population is actually BIPOC. And so it's like, is there a way to measure or make sure they're actually serving the people that they claim they're serving? That's what came up for me.
That's a really good question. And I think one factor I would weigh in is that was really heavily scored in the application. When we talked about the information that the council helped us shape the application and the questions, we really asked for, what is the percentage of your service population, and for really descriptive characteristics. And so when the reviewers created those scores, a lot of that was influenced by that information. So I think that's one primary way that we're looking at that info.
Helpful point, Brian. And I would also remind us that over half of the applications are from organizations that currently have a Levy grant. 77% of the children served by current Levy grants are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So I think you can, between scores and the way in which applicants had to answer questions about their service population for organizations, for example, that don't have a Levy grant, and what is currently happening with Levy grants, I think it is safe to assume, Lene, that the folks are going to be able to reach who they say they're intending to serve. I open it up to my teammates for anything else you want to add.
I think the only thing I'd add on populations is some people who served general or clicked all or none of the racial boxes had other populations they were specifically focused on, like LGBTQ or income or houselessness. So they were serving every cultural group within that specific population.
So can one applicant be both in the general multicultural group and the specific population group? No, it has. If they are serving a specific, like if they're serving the LGBTQ community, then they would be in the specific group. Is that right? Yeah.
It really depended on how they responded to the question. We created 3 groups, and there is not overlap between them. There are applications who said, essentially, they're serving every priority population that we identified in the application. There are applications that said, we are primarily serving the Black and Indigenous and children of color populations, and a couple of other priority populations that didn't have to do with race and ethnicity. And then there are applications that were specifically focused on a few racial and ethnic populations and a few of the other priority populations. So there's not overlap between those 3 groups. I want to answer, Alejandra, I think you were the one who asked about the relationship between, or maybe not, the whether or not an application was a current Levy grantee or not, or the organization, and the number of funding priorities addressed. Somebody had asked that question? I did not. Okay. I'm not sure who asked that. Okay. Whoever asked that, I have the information if you're still interested. Okay, I see heads nodding. Among the 76 applications from organizations that do not currently have a Levy grant, 84% of them said they are addressing 3 or more funding priorities. Keep in mind that the number of funding priorities in program areas ranges, like some had 3 or 4, some had 7. Among applications from organizations that have a current Levy grant, 92% said they are addressing 3 or more funding priorities. So it is true that applications from organizations with current Levy grants said they are addressing more priorities, but the difference between 92% and 84%, I'll leave it to you to decide if that's a lot or a little.
I had another question about a program area focus, right? So after school programs was one of the focus areas. And I think the staff had said that that is one area where there's been under enrollment. Is that correct? And so I guess a question then is, if we prioritize that, do we risk the funds not being used to serve that population? And so therefore, should we consider prioritizing, if there's equal scores, a different area that might have more need? And it's also hard to prioritize, since we haven't ranked the needs, but an area that I don't know a lot about, but I imagine there's a lot of need is in foster care, for example. So.
Sure. So when the allocation committee, you are correct that there's been some real challenges in after school for under enrollment. It hasn't been across the board. It's been some grantees, but it has been a challenge. Since the pandemic, some programs really bounced back well and some have struggled. And part of what you're talking about as far as considering, okay, do we need to sort of reduce the money prioritization for after school, sort of already happened at the allocation committee stage, where we sort of, when we set the ranges, they said, let's sort of deprioritize what we're proposing for after school, and so we kicked it to, I believe mentoring was the main one that went up. So some of that I think has already been considered for that reason, right? That we're still serving a solid number of children in after school. We're just not, some people are just not quite reaching their goal. We've only had 1 or 2 grantees that have had such significant enrollment challenges over the past year that it would be, really alarming. And so it's not across the board that it's bad.
Since Brian mentioned kicking it over to mentoring, I'll just add on to that one of the reasons why that happened is because we kind of expanded what's included in mentoring. So we added in 18 to 24-year-olds with this emphasis on pre-apprenticeship and post-secondary. That was added into mentoring. And then I would characterize mentoring to be kind of similar to what Brian's talking about with some programs have really bounced back, others have struggled, but I will also emphasize that some mentoring programs are designed to serve kids who struggle with attendance anyway. Like, that's their population. And so they're kids who weren't attending school before, so trying to get them up to the same standard. They're improving, but they're not like at the same point. Or kids who, have been touched by the carceral system, or various different things that were already going to be struggling with some of those things, and the pandemic didn't help. But kind of recovering has been uneven.
One thing with program areas that I found interesting is that for the most part in my conversations, we didn't discuss program areas, either prioritizing it or deprioritizing it. And I think generally the sentiment was that we didn't have enough information, or maybe someone had a specific personal experience, which I think is important and valuable, because I think that's part of the intention of the community council, is for us to bring in our personal, professional experiences. But I found it interesting that there doesn't seem to be a push for specific program areas. I do appreciate Lene's comment in our group, though, that when we're thinking about the different types of services that will lead to the strongest outcomes, you could argue that prioritizing early childhood care would put kids and ultimately people on a trajectory towards better outcomes over time. But those are really long-term outcomes, and we have a lot of short-term needs as well. So that didn't necessarily lead us to shift away. However, I think one thing that I'm curious about, which is less about the content of it and more about the mechanics of voting. So going back to the point where I think in the initial votes, we didn't see strong votes or anything that reached 3 for any program area. So I'm curious, and tell me if I'm not allowed to do this, but isn't then voting to balance across a wasted vote? Because the default is that you all will balance across the program areas or balance across the other ones. And so if council members feel very strongly that you need to balance across, then you can vote there. But otherwise, voting there, it's a wasted vote because you could vote to prioritize something else across a different dimension. Is that right? Or tell me if I'm not allowed to say that.
I kind of second that opinion, if that's allowed.
I just remarked to Katrina, I feel like it's really important for you all to have this discussion, and I actually feel like on that point, staff should not weigh in.
There was one category, I think, was it after-school programming that did have more votes? Was that right?
Yeah, can we see the data again?
And I think it depended on the question too.
So number
Like
three.
the number 3?
I think it was actually in both. It was both in the prioritize and deprioritize that it was vote for, I believe.
Open signal, do you mind sharing my? Oh.
Yeah.
This is the first question.
But it's still only two for after school. And ultimately, our vote will lead to just 3 priorities per question. Is that right?
The number of votes that go to a specific characteristic are dependent on how you all choose to vote. There could be up to 9 votes for each characteristic.
So it's
If every single person who has a vote voted for that characteristic. So the threes that we're seeing now are the places where in the initial poll there was already some alignment and there is the possibility for it to go higher.
So hypothetically, this is not for the staff, but hypothetically, if we voted on, if we changed our collective vote to hunger relief, which was our, how do you get a one that's underscoring up? If that was our collective one, then we could choose a different one for number 3 as a top priority, just hypothetically.
Or
Sorry,
Go ahead.
there's, if I'm looking at this correctly, there's 5 different areas, but we were asked to only vote on 3. Is that right?
So you have the option
There's
for
5
each
different priorities,
question.
Characteristics, excuse me.
Yeah, you can choose 3 characteristics per question. When you're talking about program area specifically, just within program area, there are 7 options that you could choose amongst. And that doesn't include any of the other 4 categories of characteristics.
So just for my understanding, so Steven's suggesting that versus us, picking and choosing which programs, but if we take the entire program section out of the equation, it'll be a better use of our votes to narrow down the other things, because maybe it's just, we all agree that all of the programs deserve an equal shot.
Yeah, so if we voted in this exact way, to your point, like all of those votes for the program areas would just be negated, right? Some people voted for specific program areas, which is helpful to see like the perspectives there. But because we have 3 for a balance of all, then we're effectively saying it's distributed for all. And so if we as a group agree that that's going to be the outcome, or if we're okay with the outcome, then we can just shift our attention away from it altogether and focus on the other dimensions. Unless someone through the conversations after this initial voting found that they actually want to add a vote now to the program area, especially after school, right? Because if it reached 3, then maybe it will be an ultimate priority.
So I'm going to just pause or interrupt for a moment. We have about 5 minutes left or so in this discussion, and there are a couple of folks who haven't spoken up as much. And so I just want to pause for a moment and invite folks who haven't spoken to share if there are any thoughts that you have.
Sorry. I mean, I have thoughts, but I don't know that it's contributing anything new to the matrix here. But thank you for the opportunity. I'm still marinating.
Same, I agree. I have some thoughts, but again, I don't know how. I don't think they're very helpful in anything profound, other than what I've heard. But I just need a little bit more clarity on what we are proposing here. What we're saying is we are talking about removing or not voting on the question of program area, the balance of all, no priority? Is that what I'm hearing? Or the
Yes.
opposite?
Yes, I think that's my interpretation, because if we vote for it, we're just voting for the default. So if we don't vote for program area, then we can place priorities on other things that we care about more, because that's all, it's basically a free vote for what we wanted, which was the balance. That's just they're gonna balance it whether we vote, if we vote. If we don't include that as a vote, that's what will happen. That's what will happen.
And I think it's also a situation of we are just trying to make it more concise. And if there's ways for us to take certain things out of the equation to be more precise for the staff, I think that's going to be a win for everybody.
Yeah, I agree.
And we don't necessarily need to come to consensus about like not voting in that area. You know, everyone can do with this what they want, and you can still vote in that area. Just know that unless, well, based on these figures, unless one program area gets 3 or more, it is unlikely to be a priority. But I could be wrong. Everyone might vote differently in the next round, so. Yeah.
I do want to offer one just like logistical keep in mind. There are 22 things that you can choose, but you have 3 votes each question. So as you consider the option that Stephen is proposing and that other people are reflecting back, it might result in you having 21 things to choose from because you are purposefully leaving one behind. Is that what you're proposing, Stephen? Oh, right, correct. Sorry, my math. All right, Katrina has another clarification and reflection.
I think one of the things that I want to lift up to check my own understanding is that I am hearing in this discussion from council members that if there are minimal votes within a category of application characteristic, so when I say category, I'm referring to PCL program area, recent PCL funding status, size of organization, focus population, and funding priority, that if there's minimal votes in that, you all want us to default to balance.
I think specifically when it comes to program areas, I think that's it. I think just assume if we don't vote at all for any of the programs, just assume that we want balanced. But that again, that's if we all agree, and that's if no one changes their mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, that, and this is one of the things that Lolita and I were reflecting on in our conversation, is that for both of us, and I don't know if this applies to other folks, I can only speak to our conversation, but program area and application characteristics are not kind of apples to apples categories for us. So it's hard to have them all on the same list. So I think if we sort of have a general consensus that defaulting in the program category section to just a balance in the portfolio, that allows us to be more to have more flexibility to focus on application characteristics instead, which seemed to be what more people were interested in, like talking about and moving around.
Since I haven't talked yet, in the conversations I had, it really boiled down to recent PCL funding status and below. Like the program areas were not of conversation. It wasn't there. It didn't feel like we needed why did you prioritize this particular program over this particular, like, it wasn't that conversation. It was more, what is I like that is a perspective I hadn't heard in terms of grantee or in different program. Like I heard from Jamie a perspective. I was like, I never even thought to think of that question that way, right? And so to come from it in terms of like voting for the other characteristics, I'm with Alex. It's just they seemed like different because we all correct me if I'm wrong, these are program areas that we all do feel are important. So spending our vote on characteristics that I think could be a way to either lift up and determine, I personally feel like would be better spent.
So I'm just going to go ahead and confirm my understanding, so that way staff can also have this in mind as we move forward. So what I'm hearing is that if there are minimal votes in the program area category, that the community council generally wants us to try and have a balance within that category when they're crafting portfolios. Am I hearing you all correctly? Okay. Any final thoughts? We maybe have just like time for one or two more comments before we move on to taking quiet time, actually.
I have one sort of question in terms of weighing program areas. So for example, early childhood has benefited from a lot of new funding sources. And so when the allocation committee is making its decisions, I'm just curious if there is that context piece brought in to decision making. If a program area focus is suddenly like getting a lot of funding, does that organically kind of reduce the amount? Probably not. I'm just curious.
That's a great question, Kamala. And to Brian's point earlier, when we as staff helped provide information to the allocation committee for their decisions around allocations, that was one of the things in mind. So compared to how the pie of funds were divided up before, the slice for early childhood is smaller, so that other program areas where we have seen need grow got larger. Do any of my teammates want to add anything?
Maybe just add that we don't have preschool classrooms anymore.
Please do.
So because there is preschool for all, in this funding round, we don't have preschool classrooms included. So it's funding things that other source doesn't fund.
Do we want to talk about other like question 2 or 3 a little more with our 1 minute left?
No.
I am going to go ahead and transition us to 5 minutes of solo reflection. So we're just going to give you the opportunity to digest what you've heard. There's a Zoom whiteboard that I put together that I'm going to share on the screen. You have the link for that whiteboard in the email that I sent out last night, so you can go ahead and enter it and enter any reflections that you want on that whiteboard, which will be projected up above. Or you can just go ahead and take a walk, go to the bathroom, get some food, whatever you want. But 5 minutes of solo time. And then starting at 12:35, we'll go ahead and take the final vote. 12:35. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started now. Okay, so the whiteboard will be available for you to see on your own at the link in your email. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen. Okay. Okay, and now we are going to go to the individual vote, the official vote. Don't click on the link yet. I need to change the settings so that way you can respond. Okay, so I have now opened the official vote for application characteristics. That was a different link in the list of links that I sent you. So go ahead and click on that link and you can go ahead and vote now. Okay, we have all of the responses in. Give me about 30 seconds and I'll pull them up. It's a drum roll for us too.
Okay. Oh, thanks. That's all right. We can see it up there, though. Yeah. All right. Well, people still had to vote their conscience. That is, yeah. So for the first question here, in general, after SCORE, what are the top 3 application characteristics you want to prioritize for funding? So the one with the greatest number of you selecting it is 8 out of 9 of you, and is for the focus on BIPOC children and families. And then it looks like the next one is 5 out of 9 of you for small organizations. And then it looks like the next one is 4 out of 9 of you for specific focus populations. And a few other characteristics with 2 members voting.
So would you take the top 3 in that case? Is that in terms of?
That was our plan coming into this meeting. I think we weren't sure what the results would look like, and so we kind of were going to reserve the right to convene with each other and talk through what the implications are. But
If you take the top 3, don't some of them cancel each other? In contradiction like that?
I don't think that those two are in contradiction. I think a focus on BIPOC children then gets expanded out to be a specific focus population, which could include LGBT youth, youth with disabilities, and yeah, and also populations that aren't considered BIPOC, like some immigrants and refugees, like folks who are working in the Slavic community, for example, kind of often fall between those two. So I don't think it cancels. I think it expands.
I also think, we're seeing this like you are right now on the spot. So I'm going to lift up the trends that I'm seeing, but I think it's fair for you all to leave here and for folks who are watching to conclude that we as a staff kind of have to sit with what you've given us and really make sense of how we're going to use it. But what we really wanted was your priorities. So this is super helpful. So question number 2. If an application scores at or above the median, what are the top 3 application characteristics that we would deprioritize it for funding? Okay, so I see 6 out of 9 people saying large organizations, 6 out of 9 saying general multicultural population to serve, and 4 out of 9 saying grantee organization, different program. And there are a few who had some other choices in here. And then finally, the third question, if an application scores below the median, what are the top 3 application characteristics that would help prioritize it for funding? So looks like 5 out of 9 of you said organizations that don't have a current Levy grant. 5 out of 9 of you said small organizations. And 4 out of 9 of you said population to serve, focus on BIPOC, children and families. And 4 out of 9 of you said population to serve, specific focus populations. And there are a few other answers in here. This is the only one where I've seen 3 rather than 2 or 1. And 3 out of 9 of you said applications where they address only 1 to 2 funding priorities. I think it's safe to say that staff thanks you for this difficult exercise and for the work that you've done. It will be helpful and useful to us. And I want to open it up in case anyone else on my team has anything to add.
Can I just second that enthusiastically? Because we have a lot of really challenging choices to make, and I can already sort of imagine, okay, I get a sense of what this might mean for my portfolio, like right away. This is really, really helpful. So we really deeply appreciate it.
I agree. This will be really helpful in looking at my portfolio. Thank you.
So just in terms of what's coming up, we're going to use the prioritization of characteristics alongside the other considerations that we talked about earlier to create 2 portfolios of applications to recommend for funding. This group will convene again on March 3rd, where you will review and vote on which portfolio to recommend to the allocation committee, keeping in mind you will not see the names of individual applications or other identifying information about the applications. Depending on how our meeting agendas develop for the allocation committee, Katrina might reach out to you all to see if any council members who don't have conflicts of interest are interested and willing to come to the allocation committee and help report out about this process and its results. Before you leave today, we have an evaluation that we would love for you to complete about this meeting. I popped it into the chat for those of you who are virtual, and it was also part of the email that Katrina sent last night.
And there's also hard copies that you might have picked up when you walked in.
Please also don't forget to complete your stipend invoice, and then make sure you give Katrina, if you have a hard copy of the evaluation, that before you leave, as well as your stipend invoice. And I just want to reiterate again, thank you all very much. This was a long meeting, it was dense, and we so appreciate your patience, your stamina, your good thinking, and your big hearts.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
We'll see you March 3rd.
Yay. Thank you. Good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Lolita. Thank you, Lene.